I wanted to get, as I put it at that time, into the mud and blood of the streets. And at the same time, I felt a call to live more poor and more rugged. So I was thinking of missionary work. And I had initially thought of going to Mexico, and I began to learn Spanish and so on, and nothing opened up there. It happened that I went to Alaska as a tourist. And when I was in Alaska, I discovered these remote Eskimo villages which were isolated. They were very poor. They needed priests badly. And there was no one that was really going there. And so in the spirit of Blessed George, who said, go to where the need is the greatest and which are neglected places, I got the idea that maybe God was calling me to Alaska. So I spoke with the bishop of the Diocese of Fairbanks, and he invited me to come up the following summer and give it a try. So in 1976, he sent me to the farthest north parish at that time, 37 miles north of the Arctic Circle, a town called Kotzebue in northwestern Alaska. And I fell in love with it. I loved the people and their humble, simple spirit, the simplicity of their lives, living off of the land, on food that they could harvest, caribou and seals and wild birds eggs and things like that, picking a few greens on the tundra. And their community spirit I liked. And there are little people, one of the little ones that are so much referred to in the gospel that Jesus had a special care for. They didn't have power and prestige and position and so on. And that was the kind of call that I felt. I wanted to be more powerless in my life and work with that kind of people. And so after I had the summer in Kotzebue, I asked the community if I could return the next year, and they gave me permission. And for the next summer, I was stationed on an island in the Bering Strait, just a small island, 130 Eskimos. We were surrounded by Arctic Ocean all around. They had to come to the mainland and pick me up in a homemade walrus hide boat. And I was living with them on walrus meat and wild birds eggs for almost 3 months. And it just sort of harmonized with my nature. I had been a hunter and a canoer before this. With my parents, I had traveled, and I was an athlete and a farmer. So sort of the raw aspects of Eskimo life didn't bother me. And so I really found a ministry amongst the Eskimo people. And I went back as frequently as possible, and then I asked the community if I could make it permanent. And so more or less they allowed me to do that. And now I've been working in Alaska an accumulated total of 29 years. And I really found my place there. And it continues to be a place that is in dire need of priests. And although I haven't had any fellow Marians join me there, I continue to work. After 13 years amongst the Eskimos, the bishop needed a chaplain at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. And he thought that I was the man for it because I had worked with students and spent a lot of time on a campus myself, getting my own undergraduate and graduate degree programs and so forth. And so I spent 12 years as a chaplain at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. And after that, I came back for a year, and I was working here in Stockbridge. And then the bishop said he needed somebody to create a training program for permanent deacons in the Fairbanks area. And that's what I have been doing for the past 2 years. So that kind of brings us up to date as to, my little history of working in Eskimo land and other parts of Alaska. Eskimo land, so to speak, is about 400 to 500 miles from the nearest highway or cities such as Fairbanks and Anchorage. And the people there along the Bering Sea coast live in small villages from about 150 to about 450. There are no roads access. You have to go there in a small airplane. They have no running water in most of the villages, no indoor toilets. I used to hunt with the men of the village for my own food, seals and walrus and fish, wild birds, things such as that. You can pick a few greens on the tundra for 3 or 4 weeks in the summer, but otherwise it's a pretty stringent diet. One of the big challenges for a missionary living with the Eskimos is the food. But I was always taught to eat whatever is put on your plate, what's put before you. And Jesus told that to his disciples when he sent them out, 2 by 2. Take what the people give you. So I tried to do that. And I was fortunate that God gave me that grace, I think, to live in that kind of a simple lifestyle. There was no indoor toilets. All you had was a bucket and a wooden box over it with a hole cut in it, and you'd empty out your bucket every couple of days. To take a bath, you would have to go with the Eskimos into a little shed, sort of like an outhouse, and there they would, there was a stove, you'd build a fire in the stove, and there were hot rocks over it, and you'd heat up those rocks. And then you'd come back after about a half an hour or so when it's good and hot in there with your towel and a bucket of water and your soap, and you'd strip down and then go into the heated place of that little hut and pour the water over the stones. And then the water would come cascading over into the form of steam. And you'd sit there elbow to elbow. You never just did a hot bath or a mucky, as they call it, by yourself. That would be a waste of water and a waste of wood on just one person, commodities which were very scarce. And so you'd be there naked, elbow to elbow with 3 or 4 other Eskimo men, and they're saying, "Ahakagika, ahakagika," which means like, "Oh Lord, what a life, what a life." So that was the way I used to take a bath. And some of the dangers of moving between villages by snowmobile or by boat in the summertime it was always treacherous to do that because a storm could come up. I spent 4 years in 2 villages called Stebbins and St. Michael, and then a farther village which I'd have to fly to. But I was traveling by snowmobile, and previous to my being there, a Jesuit priest and a Jesuit brother froze on the trail when they got caught in a snowstorm, couldn't see where they were going, got off the trail and were not found. They simply couldn't make their way to the safety of a village. So one time I got lost similarly, but I went to a high point of land, and the darkness kind of lifted just in time for me to see the point above the village, which was my destiny. And so I made my way there safely. But it gives you the scare. And then one time when I was on this island in the Bering Strait, the men were bringing me back in a walrus hide boat, and suddenly it sprang a leak. And we were trying to bail water, but more water was coming into the boat that we were able to get out. And the captain of the boat says to me, "Father, no be afraid, we be okay." But I must say that I was already saying my prayers and thinking, "Oh, Mother, my mom back home, you're never going to see the great pictures I got on Little Diomede Island." But as a matter of fact, with all the ingenuity that Eskimos have, where you have to make things and repair things for yourself, where you don't have electricians and technicians and carpenters and so forth, one of the men took a walrus tusk that he'd been bringing to the mainland to sell to a tourist agency, and he put the tapered end of the tusk into the hole in the boat, and it just fit in. He tied the other end to the rib of the boat, and the captain was right. We'd be okay. We made it 15 miles back to the mainland. But it's a difficult period of time right now. The Eskimos are caught between the old and the new, between Eskimo culture and white man's culture. And that's one reason that I wanted to go amongst them. I can't change the movement of what we would call progress, if it is progress, but I at least felt that I could stand at their elbow and be a support to them and let them know that God loves them, and also that they have heroes and saints and so forth amongst their people. They see football players and entertainers and so forth on television, you know. Well, none of them are Eskimo, you see. So it gives the young boys, you know, nothing to hope for. They're not 6'9" and 10 and become NBA basketball players. See, that's inaccessible to them. So all of these things that are inaccessible to them, and they're so far away, their isolation and their poverty, it's very frustrating. So it leads to confusion for the young people and depression. And so I wish that we could actually, more priests, sisters, brothers, to work amongst people there in the Alaskan wilderness. And there are Indians. I haven't worked much with the Indians, but there are also Indians there that suffer a lot of the same problems and so on. Divine mercy, that particular form, according to the revelations given to Saint Faustina, was not well known when I first came to Alaska in 1976. That's when I started. But I have since then introduced it, and you know, the Eskimo people have always sort of have an instinctive feel that there is some other being that helps to guide and direct their life, and that they depend upon that being that we would call God, even before the Christian missionaries came. And so then that was enough for me to use sort of as a step in talking to them about God's mercy, about God's compassion, about his concern for their problems, for their plight, and so forth. Now that I'm in Fairbanks, I have a Divine Mercy Sunday every year, just like we do here and other places, and I'm more and more introducing that to my candidates for the diaconate. I also have a group called Spirituality for Men, and that's one of the things that I present to them as a part of Christian spirituality. So I think it's in a small scale yet in Alaska, because really I'm the only one, but other people are catching on to it too and talking about it and praying the chaplet and doing things such as that. But it's got a long way to go, I would say, into the consciousness of the people. Their Divine Mercy would be appealing to those people in Alaska, in the white villages, who have come up there as sort of an escape. You know, an awful lot come to Alaska in a sort of dream of a new life. Maybe something happened back home, family, divorce, failure in business or whatever, or maybe just a challenge, you see, of a new land, or getting away from government, institutionalization and so on. A lot of people like that. Well, a lot of times they drop off their religion when they drop off everything else, leave it back here, come up to Alaska. So there are many unevangelized people. So I think to them, Divine Mercy would be an appeal.